It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello and welcome to the show. I am excited to talk today with my guest. Joining me all the way from Melbourne, Australia, is Sue Barrett, CEO of Barrett Consulting Group. There's this rapid trend toward increasing specialization in sales roles. We've got sales development reps, business development reps, inbound sales development reps, outbound sales development reps, account execs, customer success, and so on. And you'd think that a company that's increased specialization and sophistication would be more nuanced understanding of the types of people who could successfully fill these jobs. Instead, it seems that sales leaders are still stuck on relying on old-fashioned, outdated stereotypes such as hunters and farmers. I guess my question is, do these archetypes still have any relevance or meaning at all for sales? And my guest today, Sue Barrett, is going to help us sort this all out. Sue, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So why don't you just take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us a little about how you got started in sales.
Well, it's very interesting. My company specializes in helping people and businesses sell better. And my company will be 21 years old this coming January. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And we're a full-service consulting, advisory and education firm just specializing in the area of sales, from sales strategy, sales force design, mapping what good needs to look like, and also, of course, training and coaching and creating perpetual learning environments for sales teams and sales leaders. So it's been a really interesting journey in the last 21 years trying to map and unpick what good needs to look like for businesses. Where I did start my career in sales, interestingly enough, was in my family-run business. My father ran a big timber wholesaling business, and he had 120 staff, and he was the CEO and lead sales manager. And in fact, that's where I learned what good selling was, not that I knew it at the time. And then I ended up doing a science degree. I fell into the pharmaceutical industry in sales back in the early 1980s. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's where I learned how not to sell, because a lot of these companies taught us how to, pardon the expression, but show up and throw up information in front of doctors.
Right.
And it didn't feel right to me. Because when I look back now in hindsight, I look back at what my father did. He just was proactive, but he liked helping people, and he listened and he understood where they were coming from, and then he would sort things out for them. And in my studies over the years and in this business, I find that the best salespeople tend to be the ones that, yes, they're proactive and can step out there to find opportunity, but they're the ones also who like actually helping people sort things out. And they're very handy and very useful to know. So post the sort of rather shaky start to my professional sales career in the pharmaceutical industry, I did actually fall into the recruitment industry by default, and I turned out to be quite a good sales recruiter. And I spent about 8 years interviewing salespeople and managers across industries, mostly the technical and industrial, medical, scientific markets. And I interviewed approximately 8,000 people face-to-face, about an hour each.
Wow.
In sales.
Wow. That's like four full years of interviewing.
Well, the interesting thing about being in that job, and it was an apprenticeship for running my own business actually, is that where I worked, if you didn't bill anything, you didn't earn anything. So you pretty quickly learned how to manage your own portfolio. Mm-hmm. But it was also a really interesting insight into salespeople. And so I met a lot of different types of people from industry, and I found it fascinating that the people, when I spoke to sales managers, the number one thing they asked for was industry experience. But what I soon worked out was that industry experience didn't actually allow for new ideas or new opportunity. And so a lot of them were just recycling the same old people with the same old knowledge and the same old experience, and then we're getting the same old results in the industry. And it turned out that my best placements were people not from the industry. So I worked out pretty quickly that if there had been a behavioural sciences degree when I was at university, and I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, I've actually by default now become a behavioural scientist. So this topic we're talking about today is close to my heart because I'm really interested in what good looks like What are the qualities we need to take into account, and how can we develop people to be magnificent salespeople?
Well, great answer. And on your LinkedIn profile, you call yourself a sales philosopher. I like that. So, what do you mean by a sales philosopher?
Well, I think, to me, we live by the philosophy that selling is everybody's business, and everybody lives by selling something.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And the last bit of that, everybody lives by selling something, is not my own phrase. That's actually a phrase coined by Robert Louis Stevenson. And you may recall that Robert Louis Stevenson, he was an author and a travel writer, and he actually wrote the books Treasure Island,
right.
Kidnapped, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're probably the most famous ones that people would know him for. And he also travelled the world, though, and it was really hard to do so. I mean, he lived in the latter part of the 1800s. He was very insightful in terms of his observations of people and the nature of people. And he was a travel writer, a poet, an author, a journalist, and he travelled the world and went to all sorts of countries. And one of the phrases that he coined through observation of people was that really everybody lives by selling something. Whether it's through friendship or commerce or whatever, they're exchanging something with each other. And and I'm quite philosophical in how I try to look at things and what are sort of the truths that really stand the test of time. And so it's very interesting. A couple of years ago, when my eldest son, who's now 17, said to me, "Mum, look, I don't believe that everybody lives by selling something." And I said to him, "That's really interesting, darling. Why do you say that?" And then he tried to persuade and convince me why it wasn't
He tried
true.
to sell you why that was not true, right?
Exactly. I then said to him, "But, Josh, by the very nature of you trying to persuade and convince me, aren't you trying to sell me something?" And he went, "Oh, yeah." So I think I come to sales from the philosophy, I suppose, that this is a life skill. This is something that's a truth, that ultimately, at the end of the day, when we're engaging with each other, whether it's for friendship or commerce or whatever, that we're just trying to help each other understand each other, and just some of us do it better than others, if you see what I mean, and some of us do it for the right reasons and some not, and and it's a continuum, and it will shift and move and shape and all that kind of stuff. So I've always been quite I have been accused of thinking too much, I will confess. So I think I am by nature quite philosophical, but I'm also very practical and pragmatic about things.
Yeah,
So
that sounds like me, actually, in some regards. I'm guilty of the same things. Well, I think to your point about everybody lives by selling something. I mean, Daniel Pink, if you've read his book To Sell Is Human, makes the point that roughly three quarters of white collar workers in the United States that he talked to feel that it's part of their responsibility, basically, to sell themselves or sell their ideas, internally within an organization, in order to promote a certain agenda or get the work done that they need to get done.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you look at it as a life skill, not just as a front of house business skill, it's incredibly important. Now, what your intentions are that lie behind that, well, that's obviously, that can come in all sorts of shapes and forms. Right. But, when I look at a business and, in your introduction, when you were mentioning all these different, sales roles, I actually philosophically and practically actually look at the whole value chain across the whole business. To me, everybody lives by selling something, and selling is everybody's business should actually be part of the mandate of every single employee in an organisation. So what is our line of sight to the customer? How is my role affecting the relationship that we have with our customers, and also back out the other end in terms of suppliers? Mm-hmm. And I think that if we're going to actually have good business out there where we're not trying to rip people off or, exploit people, if we actually want to have good business happening, then everyone should actually have, an orientation around or an ownership of the concept of selling is everybody's business.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, my most recent book, I'm pretty explicit right up front saying sales is a service you provide to your customers. Mm. And I think it's absolutely true that if you don't have that service orientation when you're selling, then it's just something you're trying to do to someone, and that's not nearly as effective as doing something with someone.
Well, it's not a long-term strategy, and I think that when you actually make yourself available to be useful to people and to help them sort things out or achieve certain things, whatever is the mandate. The fact is that people value that. They recognise that. And look, some people want to take advantage of that if we don't know how to stand up for ourselves and we don't know how to articulate the real value that we offer. But those sorts of things, you can help people have foundations that will help create stability for them when they're dealing with a range of people. But the vast majority of people want to do good business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. So, I mean, getting back to sort of the theme that we started with is sort of this idea about, I read one of your blog posts about, hunters versus farmers, a topic that's, been around in sales for what seems like forever. And, you talk about really how those roles are, in some respects, pretty irrelevant these days.
Mm.
So why is it that sales managers and CEOs, entrepreneurs seem so stuck on these sort of broad, easy labels, right? Really misleading labels of sales reps as either a hunter or farmer?
I think it's a broader issue. It's a symptom of what I would call point solution-itis, where selling is a complex system of variables and approximations. It is not a linear process. It's not black and white. It's not easy to report on, as we well know. So I think what happens is, in the absence of, deep understanding and thinking about these situations and being able to deal with variabilities and complexity, people look for easy answers or easy solutions. Well, they're not solutions. They're just sort of, options, if you like, that may or may not work. And so I think hunters and farmers, the terms that we're discussing, are symptoms of people looking for the easy answer and not actually looking and or being able to deal necessarily with the variables that go with a complex system like sales operations.
Well, and I think that it speaks to a point you were talking about before, is that it's really not customer-oriented, it's internally-oriented, right? I mean, customers aren't out there, customers aren't out there saying, gosh, I hope an overly aggressive extrovert comes and calls on me today.
Well, I mean, if you go back into the 1980s, 1990s, that sort of thing, even to the 1970s, and if you think about some of those environments, some of those sales environments where, you would have company plaques customer plaques or names up on the walls of boardrooms, like big game hunting, I mean, the language in those environments, and still in some areas, is about the kill or the target. I mean, it was very, very, aggressive, very testosterone laden. It was all out there, and hence the term hunters. And it was also too at a time, I think, when, product, could have differentiation, and you could just go in there with your features and benefits and probably have an edge compared to, say, your competitors at the time. But products are now, of course, so easily copied, and the edge has diminished markedly. So, price becomes the variable there. But back in those sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, sort of very, as I said, sort of testosterone-laden, aggressive, you got terms like hunter, and unfortunately, they're not just disappearing. It's like the negativity of, when people think about salespeople, all those negative stereotypes. I mean, they've been around forever, and we actually produced a paper called The History of Sales Methodologies and Why Some Work and Others Don't. And we actually talk about this whole sort of legacy of the negativity of sales and, of course, some of the sales practices that, didn't help the cause, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so these terms are legacy terms, and people just use them out of convenience because they actually really don't understand what good selling needs to look like for their businesses and how to articulate them better. And I know that might be a harsh statement, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, so if we were to turn it around and say, okay, well, what are the qualities that prospects and buyers are looking for in a sales rep?
Well, if we're looking at what good needs to look like, they expect to be helped. They expect to be informed in a way that's actually effective and efficient, so not just dumping more information on them. They expect to be listened to and to be, understood in such a way that you can work within their system, so that you're actually being able to deal with complexity and ambiguity as much as you're being able to provide clarity and articulation within that.
Mm-hmm.
they expect you to actually be business people who can sell, to be honest, not just product jockeys and technical experts. They expect you to have a level of business acumen, particularly in business-to-business selling, but even in complex business-to-consumer selling, you need to be able to understand the broader, economic, political, environmental, social climate of which you work in. You don't always have to trot that out, but you need to have that as a backdrop. So, we need people who can think and actually make decisions and not just, talk at people. And you've got to, and I mean, there's that interesting work by Adam Grant in his book Give and Take, that the really good ones are otherish in that they understand other people. They're empathetic, and I don't mean that they give way to the client, but they do understand them. And they're also prepared to help them see different alternatives. But that doesn't mean to say that they're aggressive in nature either, but they're able to help people look at other variables in context of the situation that client or prospect is actually considering.
Yeah, I mean, I look at sort of ideal qualities, and the empathetic is one. I love that term, otherish. That's really a good word. Curious, problem solver, listener, as you talked about. And yet it's so rare that you see these qualities in a job posting for an opening, right? For a sales opening.
Oh, well, and I think that is, again, our head of learning and development is German, and he has a fantastic saying from Germany, which is, you sweep the staircase from the top down. And it comes from the top. And you have got to be able to set that agenda and set that mandate of what you're looking for. I don't know about America, although I know bits and pieces, of course, but in Australia, we're fairly, well, there's some hierarchy, but we're reasonably egalitarian, and you'll find that in a lot of cultures that they're very interested in people who are capable and able, and we can't be a one-trick pony in this country because our population's too small. Unlike America, where you could probably have a product and sell that for quite some time and make a lot of money out of it. In Australia, you can't because we just don't have the population base. So by default, we have to be much better at solution selling. And because we're bringing in a range of services or a range of, products and, so we have to be able to be much better at listening and understanding and weaving in a solution sell rather than just here's one thing, off you go. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think there's certainly some logic to that. I mean, Australia's what, 35, 40 million?
No, only 23 at the moment.
Only 23, gosh, okay, should have done. So that's, you're talking about well under 1/10 the size of the United States in terms of population. So yeah, the number of opportunities are relatively small.
That's right. So you have to actually be able to provide, if you want to have a longer term relationship with your clients, you just can't sell one thing, if you see what I mean. So I wonder sometimes that in certain marketplaces, because of size, that you might be able to get away as a business, maybe more so in the US, with, one, I'm in inverted commas here, one thing that you can sort of like a bushfire take out to your marketplace and eke out a lot of opportunity. Whereas in this country and maybe other countries at smaller scale, it wouldn't work that way. So I think the other thing too is that it's we've got to look at everything in context of the environment and the marketplaces that we're in. So yeah, of course it's not a one size fits all approach.
No, it's not. Well, we're going to take a short break here. When we come back, we're going to talk some more with Sue Barrett about the right personality types for sales, as well as talk about a report that her firm has put out called the 16 sales trends of 2016, or the 12 sales trends, of 2016. But before I go, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. I pose this to all my guests, and give you a second to think about it when we go for our break. So here's the scenario. You've been hired as a new sales manager at a company whose sales are badly in need of a turnaround, and upper management's really anxious to have this happen in a hurry. So what are the 2 things you could do in the first week that could have the biggest impact?
Okay.
So talk about that when we get back. And my guest today is Sue Barrett from Barrett Consulting in Australia.
Hi, this is Andy. Connect and Sell is used by sales reps at nearly 1,000 companies, including hundreds of technology startups and several Fortune 500 companies, to overcome the challenges of getting prospects on the phone. Companies using Connect and Sell grow their revenues faster by enabling their sales reps to have more sales conversations in 90 minutes than they could otherwise achieve in an entire week. Connect and Sell can be deployed directly to your sales reps, or you can take advantage of their outbound on-demand service, which delivers qualified prospect meetings scheduled directly on your sales reps' calendars. Visit connectandsell.com to learn more about how Connect and Sell can start filling your pipeline today.
Hello and welcome back to the show. With me today is my guest Sue Barrett from Melbourne, Australia. And we've just been talking about hunters and farmers and their relevance in sales today. And before the break, I posed a hypothetical scenario to you about you're a new sales manager in a sales turnaround situation, sense of urgency is high. What do you do in the first week? Two things you do in the first week that have the biggest impact.
Okay. The first thing that I would do, they kind of work in parallel with each other. The first thing that I would do is get the senior executive together and the other sales leaders, if there were other sales leaders in the business, and I would do a complete audit of the sales strategy and operations. I, of course, can say that because we actually have an audit questionnaire that we'd actually do this with companies. But if I had access to that, that's the very first thing that I would do, to get a baseline report on all the components of a sales operation and actually get the health check of that. Because by understanding that, we will know where the various areas are that we need to tackle straight away. Mm-hmm. And obviously within that, we would be looking at sales results, and we'd be looking at strategy. We would be looking at market segmentation. We would be looking at our sales messaging. We would be looking at our current sales force structure. We'd be looking at things like what sales processes are in place. Now, in 1 week, that might be a bit rich to get through everything, but this is what I would be looking at, and various, and our governance and technology and those things. So I have like a checklist that I would work through, and I would work with the senior leadership group to get access to that information and to also have them contribute their thoughts on that area. And then the other thing is that I would, depending on the size of the sales force, I would want to go and at least meet with all the sales leaders first. And then if I can get out to as many of the salespeople as possible, I think I'd probably need at least a month or so to be able to get around to everyone, depending on the size of the team. But I would endeavour to try and speak to as many of these people as possible face-to-face, or at least over the phone to start with. But I would want to understand where they're at, what was happening, understand their challenges and issues that they were facing in the marketplace. And I would obviously have a look at sort of the impact. And I'm sorry, I'm going to throw in a third thing, and that is to look at, and that is to look at the actual messaging from the business. Is it client-facing, or is it all about them? Because unfortunately, most companies' marketing material or brochure, if you know what I mean, the brochures that you for their materials. If we look at most companies out there, Andy, who are most companies' websites or brochures written for? Themselves or their customers?
Mostly themselves, I think, yes.
Exactly. So I would be looking at that. Even before I joined, I would have looked at all of that, and I already would have a checklist. So if it was written about themselves, I'd be working very quickly to turn around and make sure that was properly aligned to the segments we want to go after, and absolutely have it be customer-facing and customer-centric. So, they'd be the couple of things that I would immediately start to focus on.
Sounds good. So I want to talk again about this report, or not again, but talk about this report that you produce every year, the 12 sales trends of 2016. Now, is this meant to be just for Australia, or is it, encompass other markets as well?
It encompasses other markets as well, so we try to make it as global as possible. So, because we're not, whilst Australia is an island, we're not an island business-wise, and we're obviously part of a global economy. So what we do is we report on as many global trends as possible, but then we'll also make some perhaps emphasis on some of the things that are happening for Australia as well. So it does have some Australian eccentricities in there, but we do want to make sure that we're looking at global trends, and then whatever that may translate to from a local perspective here in this country.
So what's on tap for 2016 in terms of some of the trends you're seeing?
Okay, well, just to give you a bit of a sneak peek of what's coming through, the thing is about less is more, and it's about decluttering, because we are in the midst of a tsunami of information, and it's causing great angst for people in terms of decision making. One of the trends will be about competition zero, which is indecision. And a lot of us worry about our competitors out there, current, direct, alternative. But in fact, indecision is one of the biggest competitors facing businesses at the moment, simply because a lot of there's too much information and people are overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. And trusted names of the past aren't necessarily trusted anymore, or not there at all. But there's so many other alternatives, and it's hard to find the truth and the real facts in a sea of opinion and, pardon my expression, crap.
Yeah. Well, there was a study that came out. You probably saw that this year. Gosh, I forget. In 2015, I forget which firm authored it. Basically, found that, gosh, it's 50 to 60% of qualified sales opportunities end up in no decision.
That's right, and so that's your biggest competitor in many cases.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do we, as salespeople and businesses, combat that? And that's part of one of the trends that we're talking about. A trend doesn't have to be a good trend, because one of the trends we had, in 2015 was the first trend was the race to the bottom, where there are organisations out there, because companies aren't delivering value beyond product, they're getting screwed on price, and then you find these predatory tactics of businesses, often large businesses, who are going after suppliers in such a way that they are actually, it's this race to the bottom in terms of who they can, drive, down. And of course, it's not a long-term, strategy for success. It's a short-term thing, but it causes a lot of distress and pain and erosion.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, if you're a smaller company trying to compete against a larger enterprise, they're going to use their pricing power against you in a predatory fashion, try to drive you out of the market.
Oh, absolutely. But also too, there's also, when they're looking at vendors, there are those large companies that are, preying on these people. So, the irony is we're talking about hunters and farmers from a sales perspective, but you could probably say that they live in procurement, where you've got this predatory effect happening, and it's a very simplistic view of the world, because they just cut out any form of real value, and a lot of companies are looking for innovation from their suppliers. They are looking for people who can bring along nuanced ideas or different ways or different combinations of things, and you can't do that if you've just got a product and a price on an online bidding, Dutch auction type thing. That's just ridiculous. So again, it's the chicken and the egg. People have got to step up and walk away from these predatory practices that some, client organisations are putting on their, suppliers. So how do you do that? How do you work away from that?
And what are you seeing as good practice or best practice to do that?
Well, it's about not just taking things at face value and actually throwing the line back on organisations who have these sort of practices, and just saying to them, look, what are the things that you actually have in place, and what are the things that you're going to be held accountable for, because there's all care, no responsibility in many of these contracts. So, for example, by asking questions, for example, of your client company or what is their risk management strategy? What other activities are they taking to reduce costs, rather than throwing the costs all back onto the supplier? Ask them, what plans do they have in place if the supply chain fails them? Once you throw those sorts of questions back, it shows you if they've actually done the thinking, or they're caught up in very simplistic thinking as well. So they're the sorts of things. You just have to be more strategic, more courageous, and also prepared to walk away and not have all our eggs in one basket as suppliers.
Mm-hmm. So and from your point of view, what can sellers do to reduce this no decision rate? What are some of the two or three things that if an entrepreneur is listening to this and he's got a sales force or a small business owner, that's really critical for them oftentimes because they're running on fairly thin pipelines compared to other companies, is what can they do to make sure they better qualify the opportunity and actually move them past that point of no decision?
Okay, well, a couple of things. Firstly, it depends on who you're selling to. Where this no decision tends to be more significant or more prevalent is in larger organisations where they have decision by committees.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're a smaller business or, medium-sized business, entrepreneur, I would make sure, depending on what you're selling, of course, is that I wouldn't be putting all my eggs in the big business basket. I'd be making sure that I have relationships with business, so variety. I would have relationships in new market segments with medium to smaller businesses where you're in a position, because if you're going to be dealing more with the business owner and there's less people involved in the decision-making process, that at least will be much easier in terms of getting articulation around a decision. The other thing that's important then too is when you're meeting with people, be very, very clear about your value proposition and how you actually help organisations be successful, and also be fantastic at clearing away the crap. Don't dump more information on people. Help clear it away by asking good questions and finding out specifically what that company is trying to achieve or that client, and then being very clear about how you can help them actually reduce noise, about how you can help them get where they need to go, and that you can back it up with evidence so that they feel safe and can trust you.
Now, it seems like part of this issue with multiple decision makers is not only just an artifact of selling to larger enterprises, but it also appears, based on the research, or at least we're seeing here in the States, is that somewhat generational, that the Gen Xers and the millennials have a little more consensus-based decision-making style.
Yeah, they can have more consensus-based style, which is not a problem, but that in itself, unless we've got a strategy, because that's the other thing I notice about organisations, is that strategy is poorly formed and poorly executed in many businesses. Again, because I think lack of complex thinking. And, of course, if you don't have experience under your belt, you don't have a lot to rely upon in terms of, the instincts and background information, that you've had in the past. So I think it's really important that when you come across a company and they don't know what they don't know or they don't know what they want, I would actually say, and it's a big call, but I would actually say they don't have a clear strategy about their business. And they actually don't know what they want to do. And so then you're kind of like the recipient of their lack of direction.
Yeah, and there's no impetus for change at that point.
Well, that's right. And so they stall and they become indecisive. So I think it's really interesting that the really good clients that we work with, even if they have some question marks, they know where they want to go. And in our case, when we work with them, they just need certain assistance or clarity, or they just want an independent view to help them clarify things. But they already know where they want to go. They just need some advice or guidance about what's the best way to get there, if you see what I mean. So it's not that they don't know where they want to go. When I meet other organisations and they're all flipping and flopping about and, I'm not sure about this, I mean, firstly, it drives me mad. But it's about, well, what are you here to do? What are you trying to achieve? And then they give you that kind of look and they go, oh, well, and you just go, you can't make them, have a vision.
No.
They've got to have one. I mean, you can help them shape it and craft it, but you can't make them have a vision. And if they don't have one, they don't have a strategy, then, you're pushing it uphill. So I think the advice for any, company wanting to work with other companies is find out what their vision is and the clarity, and look at the leadership, back to the sweeping the staircase from the top down. Do they have something that's compelling, that's driving them towards the future? And if they don't, then they're probably going to be a bit tricky to work with. Even if they're very nice, they're going to not be as easy to work with, and it may be more difficult for you to engage with them, and that's where it could take a lot more time to get results.
Yeah, or maybe you just need to put them in nurture mode and come back when they've got some clarity around their own business vision and business plans.
Well, that's right. not going to jettison them and say no. But the fact is that you just might need to move on and come back, as you say, when they're ready. And if they're not ready, chances are they won't be around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good. Great answer. So we're going to move into the last segment of the show. I've got some rapid fire questions for you. You can give me one word answers or you can elaborate as you wish. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So what's the most powerful sales tool in your arsenal?
Okay. From a salesperson perspective, is my interest in other people and wanting to understand where they're coming from. So my curiosity and otherishness, if you like.
I'm going to start using that word, by the way, otherish. I like that a lot.
I just want you to know I can't claim that word as my own because that came from the book from Adam Grant's Give and Take. So that's where it's from. But yeah, it's just my inherent interest in people and what they want to do, and then how I could be of assistance to them, and then the skills, of course, go with that. So yeah, and as a sales leader, is the ability to be able to craft and communicate and deliver strategy.
Okay, great. So name one tool that you use for sales management that you can't live without.
Coaching skills, coaching tools.
Okay. Who's your sales role model?
Actually, my dad. He was very otherish and a really, really kind and but very focused, achievement-oriented man. He was a very good role model.
Very good. So what's the one book, whether it's a sales book or not, one book every salesperson should read?
Oh, that's very interesting. I read so many things. Okay. I would actually say at the moment, off the top of my head, I would read that Adam Grant book, Give and Take. Okay,
it's Give and Take?
Give and Take by Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton University in the US, and I would suggest that they read that at the moment. I may think of others, but off the top of my head, that one would be very useful for them.
All right, I like that one. So here's a really tough question. So what's your favorite music to listen to pump yourself up for an important meeting or sales call?
I'm not one of those people that needs the
external motivation.
No, I'm intrinsically driven by my curiosity. But if I was to say that if I was to have a piece of music, it would actually be quite the contrary to pumping me up. I think I would like something that quite meditative and beautiful that would be quite calming. And so some beautiful piece of classical music or some lovely sort of meditative type thing. I find selling, if you're in the zone, quite zen, not a rah-rah, pump your tires up kind of thing. Because to me, that stuff's a bit like a hot bath. It soon gets cold. I would rather something that actually calms me, keeps me calm and centered and ready to listen.
And so what's your favorite classical piece?
Anything from Bach, but particularly the Bach violin concerto. The cello concerto. So I love Yo-Yo Ma's concerto, the cello pieces that he plays.
But not the Brandenburg concertos?
Oh, well, they're beautiful too, but I love the cello, and Bach is rather beautiful and very mathematically oriented as well. There's just something about what his music does that I find really embracing.
Excellent. So what's the first sales activity you do every day?
I make sure that I check my plan. I usually have the plan the night before. I just check my schedule. I think making time for key activities is very, very important. So it would be planning, and confirming my plan for the day. And then, of course, it would be, depending on my project list, but certainly one of the key things every day would be prospecting, because I think that's one of the biggest issues most people have, is that they don't make enough of the right kinds of calls to the right kinds of people consistently well.
Got it. Last question for you. What's the one question you get asked most frequently by salespeople?
How to prospect. Because they're not too bad at planning, and once they get in front of someone, they're not half bad, but they're usually terrified of actually prospecting. So it would be, how do I make that call?
And your answer is?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, you have to be prepared about knowing how to make a call, And so you've got to break it down into its components, understand who you're calling and what it's going to be about. So I have a little process I take them through to show them how to make the call. And if that is all they need, that should alleviate the problem and they're on their way. However, if they also still suffer from, hesitations to making calls because they're frightened of various things, then it's also helping them to understand what it is that's causing them anxiety and fear around that, being able to break that down and then look at that logically in such a way, and then helping them develop their resilience and practice making calls. Mm-hmm. So practice, and getting used to it, and but having a reason to call someone and not just blindly doing it, and then helping them alleviate the anxiety, moving from distress, fight and flight into a more alert but focused and prepared manner. So, they're the sorts of ways we break it down to help them.
Well, great. Well, thank you. I want to thank my guest today. It's been Sue Barrett, joining us all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Sue, please tell people how they can learn more about you.
Well, you're very welcome to come to barrett.com.au, where you can get access to our over 600 blog posts and other information, including white papers and all sorts of things, if that's of interest to you. The other thing, if you want to do any online self-development, you can go to salesessentials.com, where there's a whole range of online sales training resources available for people to help them be magnificent in selling. But thank you, Andy, for the opportunity to speak with you and your guests and your listeners today.
Yeah, well, it's been my pleasure. It's been great meeting you. So remember, everybody, make it a part of your day, every day, to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate the pace of your business. Whether you're subscribing to this podcast, it's certainly an easy way to do that. That way you'll make sure you don't miss any of our conversations with top experts like our guest today, Sue Barrett, who share their experience and expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining us. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.